Dave, I've always been fascinated by the concept of existence, and when I think about existence, what that means, I'm always back to consciousness. But then I see some philosophers telling me that consciousness is an illusion, doesn't really exist. You think otherwise?
I think consciousness is the thing we know about more directly than we know about anything in the world. You know, the great philosopher Descartes said, we can doubt the existence of anything in the world. I could doubt that you exist. Maybe this is just a dream. I could doubt that any of the tables and chairs around us exist. I could maybe even doubt the existence of my own body. But the one thing I can't doubt is that I'm conscious right now. You know, I think, I am conscious, therefore I am. My consciousness is presented to me more directly than anything else in the world. If this is an illusion, then the illusion is consciousness.
Some say, okay, that's Descartes, they ridicule him. They say, now that we know about the brain, we know how the neurons work, the spikes of activity, the synapses, the chemical compositions, the complexity, that out of that complexity of 100 billion neurons and trillions of connections, consciousness can emerge. Still an illusion.
Maybe consciousness emerges from something else. I mean, this is a further question downstream, but the number one datum of the science of consciousness and the philosophy of consciousness is there is consciousness. Now, is it a primitive? Is it the first element of reality? Or is it something derivative? Is it sort of a second element of reality that somehow emerges from the brain? Well, that's an open question, at least at the beginning of the discussion. But you can't question that consciousness exists.
Well, you can question that I think consciousness exists and that I seem to have a focal point, but you can show that activity at the brainstem, so-called reticular activating system, makes you focus on visual things or auditory things. So, you know, you think you're this unified consciousness, but really you have these streams of data that you're focusing on, and that's all it is.
I tell you what, I can question your consciousness. I can't be 100% certain that you are conscious right now. Maybe you're just like acting conscious and you're walking the walk, you're talking the talk. Maybe nothing's going on in there. Maybe you're a zombie. I can't question my consciousness. I'm experiencing it directly. Right, it's more real to me than anything else.
Tell me about zombies. You've really had a major impact in the philosophy of mind by talking about zombies. It's a funny word, but there's some significance there.
Well, there's a lot of kind of zombies. You know, there's the zombies in the Hollywood movies. I guess they're dead. Yeah. They come back to life. And then there's your Haitian zombies. I guess they've had some kind of voodoo poison. They lack some kind of free will. Yeah. But the zombies that philosophers are concerned with, they're just like you and me, but they lack consciousness. They walk around acting like a conscious being, talking like a conscious being, but they're not conscious.
You stick them with the pin, they say, ow.
Exactly. And you ask them, are you conscious? They say yes. And no one thinks zombies actually exist. I'm not a zombie. I don't think you're a zombie. But we can at least make sense of the idea. They seem to at least be imaginable. You know, you say, could God have created a world with zombies? To use a metaphor here for a second. It seems like God could have done that. Our world is not a world of zombies. We're not robots. We're not automata. We're conscious. That itself is something that needs explanation.
So the fact that you can conceive of a zombie means that there is a possibility of something else being needed to differentiate us from a zombie?
I would say that when God created the world, He could have created a purely physical world, just atoms in the void, no consciousness at all. That would have made sense. That's a logically consistent world. Our world isn't like that. Our world contains consciousness. That suggests that when God created the world, He had to do some more work. He had to put consciousness in. Now, subtract God from the metaphor now and just use this as a way of thinking about what exists in the world. You need the matter, then you need the consciousness.
Okay, now evolutionary theory would say, particularly evolutionary psychology, that during an evolutionary process, consciousness somehow came in, it was selected for, because if we have an awareness in our environment, we can avoid the tigers a little better, maybe plant the crops better, who knows what. But consciousness was a selected factor, maybe it emerged at random, and then developed.
Well, it sounds plausible on the face of it that consciousness plays some role in evolution. The fact is, any story anyone's ever told about the evolutionary story role of consciousness has been quite obscure and doesn't really quite make sense. The trouble is, anything you want evolution to explain, how we react, what we say, and so on, I can find some explanation for how that happens that goes wholly in terms of mechanisms, algorithms in the brain, and so on. Once I spell out that story, we say, why do you need consciousness for that?
So the evolutionary story could have worked with just reflexes, maybe higher level reflexes, but same reflexes, but no inner experience.
A really complicated inner computer, really complicated inner mechanisms. Computers are getting better and better, and maybe one of these days they're going to be able to do all the things that we can do. But then the question is, why do you need consciousness?
Okay, now this brings up the word that philosophers use, qualia. What's qualia?
Qualia is the raw sensation of experience. So I look around me and I see colors, reds and greens and blues, and they feel a certain way to me. I hear the sound of music, a far-off clarinet in the distance, the smell of mothballs. All of these feel a certain way to me. They have a quality of experience, and you've got to experience them to know what they're like. I mean, you could give me the whole map of my brain, what's going on when I see colors, when I smell mothballs, and so on. But if I haven't seen a color for myself, that's not going to tell me about the quality of seeing red, of seeing green, smelling the mothballs. You actually have to experience it for yourself.
You've talked about a advanced scientist who is colorblind but knows every wavelength of every color. And what happens when she finally sees color?
Yeah, so Mary, the famous colorblind neuroscientist, spends her entire life in a black and white room. She's never seen a color, but she learns everything there is to know about the neuroscience of color. The wavelength of the light, the neurons that fire in response, the behavior it gives rise to. She can tell you all about red and green and blue. There's one incredibly important thing about color she just doesn't know. She doesn't know what it's like to see red, to see green. She doesn't know about the conscious experience of red and green. All the brain science in the world isn't going to tell her that. Imagine one day she has an operation. She leaves her room. She says, that's it. That's what it's like to see red. She's learned something new about consciousness.
What follows from that?
That, to me, suggests that there's more to consciousness than a physical process in the brain. Because you could know all there is to know about the physical processes in the brain, and you wouldn't know all there is to know about consciousness.
You've become quite well known for defining the easy problem and the hard problem. Go for it.
There's a lot of things we want to explain when we explain consciousness. People use the word in lots of different ways. You might want to explain things like how it is that my brain perceives something in the environment, and a stimulus hits my retina, my brain integrates information, I react, I point, I say something. Maybe you could give an explanation of those things in terms of circuits in my brain or algorithms in my brain, but those are just the easy problems of consciousness.
Now we say easy, they're really hard, but relatively easy.
I'd say, a good century or two of more and more ingenious brain science is going to get us there. We're going to isolate the neural circuits, the computational mechanisms that make us behave the way we behave, do the things we do. The hard problem of consciousness is, why is all that processing accompanied by conscious experience? Why does it feel like something from the inside? Why do we have this amazing inner movie going on in our minds all the time? And it looks like the whole story you tell about neural circuits and computational mechanisms, it just leaves that question out.
Take 1,000 years into the future at the same rapid growth of science, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years. Do you see, in principle, can the hard problem, as you've defined it, be subject to neuroscience analysis?
I don't think the hard problem of consciousness can be solved purely in terms of neuroscience. I think neuroscience has a huge contribution to make to its solution. But if we just stay with the level of neurons and processing alone, there's only so much that's going to explain. Because neurons and neuroscience is all about objective mechanisms that perform functions that ultimately issue in behavior. So if you want to say explain language, explain perception, explain memory, the things we do, the functions of the brain, that's just fine. But it just explains those functions, those behaviors. And that always leaves this further question. Why is that behavior, those functions, accompanied by consciousness? For that, we need an extra ingredient in the picture, I think. We need to bring in consciousness itself, on my view. It's fundamental.
Okay, so I'm redoing this. I done a kind of response yesterday, but obviously I got a copyright strike for incorporating something from Channel 4. The reason I was making it was because of watching Martin Liebke made a video and referenced my previous content, which was Welcome to the Machine. The reason I'm making it is because Martin said, you know, that me and him have different views, that he has experienced supernatural activity. Now, I pondered that, and you know, I'm not really sure what Martin meant by supernatural activity. I think a better word would be metaphysical. Metaphysical activity. You know, I get that impression that people think, you know, I'm a materialist. You know, that there is no metaphysical aspect to existence when it's the total opposite. And I'll get into that in a wee minute. But you know, just to clear up this natural and supernatural thing, first of all, you know, when I say, you know, about studying the natural world, you know, for me this is a construct, it's a creation, it's a design, but within this creation of this construct, there is a natural order, if you like. You know, just like, you know, if you were inside an engine or, you know, some sort of mechanical device, if you were a being inside that, you know, it would appear to have a natural order to it, you know, works under certain laws and has a natural function. But you understand that it's a construct. So beyond the construct, you know, what are the laws, you know, the limitations there? You know, that could be termed as supernatural. But for me, you know, there is no gauge of natural and supernatural. As I say, this is a construct, so it's no natural. If you construct something, then it's no natural. You may use natural elements, but it's not a natural thing. It's a construct. So, for me, you know, we can study the objective reality that we're in and view it as the natural world, but you know, to then say there's a supernatural aspect, you know, there is no gauge of what natural really is for me. You know, sorry, my mind goes blank there. But you know, that's the point. You know, I just want to make that clear. You know, I don't know what natural is. You know, we can only observe the laws and the behaviours that are happening here. But as I say, it's a construct. You know, therefore for me, it's no natural. So supernatural and natural are just words that don't really have any meaning to me. But if what Martin's talking about is a metaphysical aspect, then, you know, of course I'm not a materialist. And, you know, I'll put that wee bit at the start, and I'm going to add this one on at the end. You know, I know it's long, but it's really interesting, and if people are really interested and they want to understand this kind of subject, then it's a great view, and because it breaks it down, and it you know, it explains what the terminologies are: materialism, relativism, you know, right into panpsychism, which is something I think people will find quite interesting. So, you know, for me, there is a metaphysical aspect, because consciousness is one of these things, you know, and I've always wondered that if this place was just you know, a materialist creation, there would be no reason to have experience. There would be no reason to have a conscious experience or you know, an awareness of any kind. You would just be like a robot. So, you know, and it led me to question certain things. Like I mentioned it before, if I was just my brain, why would I need to learn how to operate the body? You know, you see certain animals who don't have to learn that, especially reptiles. They're born and they move, they know. They're like, you know, almost like robotic, and they have information already there about predators and what to hunt, you know, and how to survive, because they're not nurtured and they're not shown. So, You know, and I'll leave out, you know, mentioning the zombies and the automatons and stuff because it's mentioned in these clips that I'm gonna put together. I just want to put this wee bit into kind of put where I view things in my line of thinking. As I say, for me there is a physical aspect, a metaphysical aspect. You know, I suffered but I experienced what they call sleep paralysis. As a child, it was normal to me. It was just, you know, when you tried to speak about it, people would tell you it was dreams and it was hallucinations. But for me, it was normal. And part of my sleep paralysis was having out of body experiences, if you like. Um, and again, it was normal, you know. And I always kind of was aware of my essence, and that, I feel as if this is just a journey. It's just part of experience. How we ended up here, you know, whether we're encased in the body, whether it's a trap of some sort, you know, is all philosophical. And many people have heard me saying I'm at the point now where, you know, these philosophical ideas and stuff are fine. You know, they stimulate thought and can bring people to a new place of realization. But for me, it's over. You know, a lot of these philosophies and stuff were based on bewilderment. You know, you think you live on a globe. You know, it's confusing. It's flying through space. There doesn't seem to be any, we can't explore and go and find, you know, anything that would tell us about who we are and how we came to be. But when you understand that, you know, it's not a globe and it's definitely a design construct, you know, these philosophies for me, you know, break apart, and materialism and stuff is done. Well, you know, it could be that we're creations of some other intelligence and our consciousness is just a mistake, you know, like a technology that's becoming self-aware. But I doubt that. But you know, I've still got to keep my mind open to the possibility. So, you know, although I'm putting this out there, for me, I'm beyond that point. We're at a place now where we can get rid of religions and philosophies. We can go and explore and find out, you know, the full dimensions that will probably lead us to, you know, vital clues and information that will tell us who we are and how we came to be. So, I've probably rambled and repeating here, but fuck it. So as I say, you know, in my sleep paralysis times, I had that experience. So for me, there is a metaphysical aspect, and for me, you know, as I say, materialism is dead. For me, mind put things in motion. Matter is a product of mind. It's a creation. It's a design. Now, I'm not saying it's one mind like a god. As I said before, it could be a community of minds. We could be eternal souls. There could be a group of eternal souls who just always have existed and always will. You know, a mind that has always existed and always will. Where people call it God. For me, these singular ideas of a one God or a one consciousness, they just don't add up. They break down for me. And I'm not going to get into why. You know, if somebody wants to have a discussion with me, that would be great, and you know, we can go through questions in order to see the flaws in some of these philosophies. But panpsychism is a good one, and it'll be at the end of this, and it's a really good watch. As I say, it breaks everything down, you know, to where people are. But again, you know, a lot of these philosophies for me, you know, come from a place of bewilderment and thinking you live on a globe. So now they're gone. You know, like materialism. So, and as I say, you know, that's what led me to a type of dualism, because I had to learn how to use the body. You know, it wasn't just a program that was written and it just went through its function. I had to learn. I was having internal experience, you know, looking at the world and having this internal dialogue that you'll hear in these videos and they explain on it. So I always had that question, well, why would I have that? You know, and that tells me something. For me, that tells me that I'm something more than the physical aspect. So just to clear it up, because I get that impression that people maybe think that I try and rob them of spirituality or any metaphysical aspect. If you're talking about like psychics and all this hairy fairy stuff, then for me there is no proof of that. And if anybody has solid proof, I would view it. You know, I think, you know, it would be a horrible reality if we could, you know, psychically affect each other. That would just be total fucking chaos. The reality is that, you know, the only thing that you're in control of here is your thoughts and your actions, which is good because it's your responsibility, right? And it puts you in a place of empowerment. You're not blaming a bad guy, and you're not looking for any saviour, and you're just a victim in between. You know, you're taking full responsibility. So I think it's good that it's that way. You know, it's a deep issue, you know, to understand who we are and how this came to be. But, you know, I'll reiterate it again. The reason why we're in that state is because the true timeline for me has been severed. When this creation, this technology was put into motion, we would have known. There would, you know, there would have been awareness of, you know, is it entering into the construct, and what it was about. So that seems to have been lost. So, as I say, that whole part about us learning how to use the body tells me that I'm not the body. Because if I was the body, I wouldn't have to learn how to use it. So, and the materialist thing about it being an illusion just doesn't add up. And I'll say it again, if anybody's saying consciousness is an illusion, then you would say to them, who experiences the illusion? You know, it just, there's no way to escape consciousness and what we really are. But there's a lot of people who try and avoid it. You know, and they look for a naturalistic, reductionist explanation that it all comes down to, you know, the operation of matter. So, I say, I hope I've cleared up, you know, natural and supernatural. We don't have a gauge for what natural is. We can only observe and measure, you know, how things are behaving here. But it is a construct for me. So there's another environment beyond it, which is probably the true natural environment. You know, I don't want to digress too much into this. I'll let these videos speak for themselves. But I have loads of theories, you know, about this place and how we came here and why there's different races and animals and species. You know, and it could be the possibility that, you know, something happened, whatever's happened, and, you know, different races and animals come from different places and they've been placed here. You know, like Noah's Ark, you know, this is the Ark. You know, there could have been a catastrophe somewhere. It could be something messing, you know, doing experiments. You know, there could be anything. There's so many theories now. You know, when the globe is gone, and you know that it's a creation, a design, you know, it opens it up to so many possibilities. But you know, I don't want people to get stuck in these philosophies. You know, maybe understanding what consciousness is and how people view it is a good start. But we don't need to get caught up in that. You know, that'll just keep us going in circles. You know, for me, it's about exploration. We have this natural, there's the word natural again, but my essence had this exploration thing about it. So that tells me that there's something else to explore. Well, you know, we get fed up with things, sitting still, you know, we get fed up. It's been there in our whole nature as a child. You know, you want that, you want that, you want that. You think it's the best thing. You play with it, you break it, and you move on. And that just seems to be in us. You know, this exploring and to keep moving forward and keep moving forward. And the whole game, the whole manipulation game for me is to keep you in the matrix of your mind, sitting still physically. So it's like a mind matrix creation in order to keep you physically still. But, you know, for me, you know, if we can work that out, you know, and get out of the mind matrix and realise there's an objective reality here that we can go and explore that will give us some missing answers, then the better. You know, I think people really need to get to that point in order for us to progress. You know, and that's the other aspect of it. You know, are people really wanting the truth? You know, because for me, whatever that truth is, you know, I want that truth. Whether that some higher mind created this technology or this, you know, this artistic expression, and it became self-aware, or you know, whatever the truth is, whether it's something that people don't want, or, you know, whatever people's wishes are, I don't care. You know, when I talk about these philosophies, I entertain so many ideas, but I don't believe them. and I don't sit on them. You know, I entertain the trains of thought because it opens my mind to different possibilities. But at the end of the day, whatever the truth is, you know, whether it's something horrific, you know, or whether it's something great, you know, I still want to know, and we deserve to know. Okay, so, and again, that, you know, even that leads you into so many theories about, well, maybe our true existence is something we don't want to know, and we've put these mechanisms in place in order to stop us from remembering that. You know, it's so vast, and again, I don't want us to get caught in the rabbit holes, because, you know, we could talk, and I could talk for days, weeks, and end about this stuff and extrapolate and go into so many theories. But again, you know, we can explore and we can find out. So my whole point of this was just, you know, I don't rubbish any metaphysical aspects of existence. For me, it's a creation, it's a design. For me, mind is the fundamental level of everything, right? If people can argue about what that means, you know, I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is my realization that consciousness is really significant. Okay, and I hope I've kind of covered this, and I'm sure these videos will cover it, and I hope that you can stick with it and you enjoy. Peace.
Right now, you have a movie playing inside your head. It's an amazing multi-track movie. Your movie has smell and taste and touch. It has memories, like scenes from your childhood, playing before you. This movie is your stream of consciousness, the subjective experience of the mind and the world.
Why consciousness? Well, it is the most important aspect of our lives for a very simple logical reason. Namely, it's a necessary condition on anything being important in our lives that we're conscious. You care about science, philosophy, music, art, whatever. It's no good if you're a zombie or in a coma, right? So consciousness is number one.
But at the same time, it's the most mysterious phenomenon in the universe. This is the hardest problem, perhaps, in science and philosophy. Understanding consciousness is a real key, I think, both to understanding the universe and to understanding ourselves.
The problem is in the raw materials. It looks as if with consciousness a new kind of reality has been injected into the universe, instead of just a recombination of the old realities. How can mere matter originate consciousness? How did evolution convert the water of biological tissue into the wine of consciousness? Consciousness seems like a radical novelty in the universe.
So I don't suppose that the material world includes only what physics now or in the future will reveal to us. That's not the material world. Mental causation. I mean, how can anything mental cause anything physical? A lot of people think it can't.
You want to see spirituality move something? Watch. I decide consciously to raise my arm, and the damn thing goes up. Furthermore,
And notice, it's up to me. We don't say, well, that's the thing about the old arm. Some days she goes up and some days she doesn't go up. It's entirely up to me.
There are innumerable different solutions to this problem.
Basically, they break down into two kinds. The most common ways of approaching the mind-body problem are either dualism or materialism.
All right, let's discuss both of those.
Okay. The materialist says physical reality is all the reality there is. It's all physical particles and fields of force.
We can have an absolutely mindless, ignorant, mechanical process which generates minds. And then we could begin to see how the sorts of things that minds do could be done by matter. The idea that you can somehow boil a mind, a spirit down to brain activity is just deeply repugnant to many people. There isn't something magical about the mind, that it's just neurons doing their ultimately electromechanical things. Yes, we have a soul, but it's made of lots of tiny robots.
I'm a materialist. I believe that in the end, matter is all that makes up this extraordinary world we live in. Material causes produce material effects and nothing else does. We are indeed the subjects of an illusion. I hope it's an illusion, I should say, because as a scientist, I want to believe that we can explain it in terms of physics and chemistry, the matter of the brain. In the end, we must be able to bring this all back to Earth with an explanation in terms of the chemistry and physics of the brain.
Much the same could be said about consciousness. What isn't there doesn't have to be explained. It's just not there.
Well, the first feature is it's real and irreducible. You can't get rid of it. You see, the distinction between reality and illusion is the distinction between how things consciously seem to us and how they really are. It consciously seems like there's I like the French arc-en-ciel. It seems like there's an arch in the sky, or it seems like the sun is setting over the mountains. It consciously seems to us, but that's not really happening. But for that distinction between how things consciously seem and how they really are, you can't make that distinction for the very existence of consciousness. Because where the very existence of consciousness is concerned, if it consciously seems to you that you are conscious, you are conscious. I mean, if a bunch of experts come to me and say, we are heavy-duty neurobiologists, and we've done a study of you, Searle, and we're convinced you are not conscious. You are a very cleverly constructed robot. I don't think, well, maybe these guys are right, you know. I don't think that for a moment, because, I mean, Descartes may have made a lot of mistakes, but he was right about this. You cannot doubt the existence of your own consciousness. Okay, that's the first feature of consciousness. It's real and irreducible. You cannot get rid of it by showing that it's an illusion in a way that you can with other standard illusions. Okay.
I want to argue today that consciousness is a grand illusion. But I've got to be clear what I mean by illusion. I do not mean that it doesn't exist. Dan Dennett gets this all the time. People saying, oh, you just think consciousness doesn't exist. No, it's an illusion. An illusion is something mentally misleading, something that deceives you, a false notion or impression. So an illusion, I'm saying, is something that does exist, but it's not what it seems to be. So obviously, I need to start with what it seems to be. What does it seem to be? It seems like a Cartesian theater. I can't say it like you do, but does it seem a bit like this? Does it feel like this? Does it feel as though you are inside looking out? I submit that, on the whole, it does. It feels as though I'm in here. I'm in here receiving all the inputs that come in to me. I'm the one who's experiencing them in a kind of stream of events that goes through my consciousness, and I make the decisions, the equivalent of pulling the levers. That's how it feels, but it can't be that way.
There's no Cartesian theater. Your consciousness does not consist in the fact that your brain is inhabited by an inner agent to whom your brain presence displays.
No Cartesian theater, no inner agent, separate from the brain, no magical mental dimension in the universe beyond matter.
It is not a miracle, and it isn't magic. It's a bunch of tricks. And it really is, I like the comparison with magic, because stage magic, of course, is not magic, it's a bunch of tricks. And consciousness is a bunch of tricks in the brain.
That view is a bit too close to simply denying the datum of consciousness to be satisfactory.
The problem is in the raw materials. Why aren't we zombies? I think the answer lies in the nature of the building blocks of organisms. If science acknowledges human experience at all, it must ask from what it has evolved. If it is acknowledged that it has evolved from animal experience, the question is pushed further back. At some point, does experience, mentality, or subjectivity emerge from entities that are totally lacking in these properties? Entities that are simply objects for other subjects. If the basic constituents of the physical world are purely material, then the answer must be yes. But to believe this is to affirm a miracle. Unless you believe in miracles, you would expect mindless atoms to evolve into zombies. But this does not seem to happen.
Why are we conscious? Why do we have these inner movies? Why aren't we just robots who process all this input, produce all that output, without experiencing the inner movie at all?
Now the dualist says we live in two separate realms. We live in the realm of the mental and the realm of the physical, the realm of spirit and the realm of matter. And indeed there are two flavors to the dualism. There's a substance dualism that says each of us is a separate mental entity and a separate mental substance. There are mental substances and physical substances. And then there's another, a weaker version of dualism that's called property dualism that says, well, there are genuine properties of the brain, of mental properties, but they're not physical properties, but they're not separate entities. The mind isn't a separate thing.
There wasn't a eureka moment, you know. There was this gradual dawning. It's like, oh my God, you know, I think I have to accept dualism. You know, materialism isn't going to do the work. And this was reluctant because I thought that materialism was the respectable, scientifically motivated view. So only over time did I come to see that no, you could be a dualist, and it could still be completely compatible with science. You could still be naturalistic. You could have laws governing simple entities. And you could do science with it. You could have a science of consciousness. This needn't lead you to ghosts, to spirits, to demons, or even to God. I come from a scientific background. I was trained in mathematics and physics, and I want everything to be natural, reduced to the simplest possible set of laws and entities. And the materialistic view of the world is a beautiful, aesthetically appealing view of the world that promises to explain everything. Physics to chemistry to biology to sociology. There's this problem with consciousness. It just leaves a gap. Every physical theory ever devised leaves a gap to consciousness. So I banged my head against the wall for years trying to come up with a physically based theory of consciousness. Every week I had a different physical theory of consciousness. None of them worked. And eventually I came to see this is for systematic reasons. There are reasons why no purely physical theory will ever give you consciousness. It will always be an objective theory of objective functions. None of that ever gives you subjective experience. So then it just seemed to me that on conservative scientific grounds, you know, you don't postulate entities without necessity, but when you need to, when the existing theory doesn't explain all the phenomena, you've got to expand the theory. And therefore I said, okay, we've got to add new fundamental properties to our view of the world, not just space, time, mass, charge, but consciousness. One thing we're finding as the science of consciousness and the sciences of the mind develop is just there's this gap between all of our theories of the brain and subjective experience and consciousness. No matter how sophisticated our theories get, of how the neurons in the brain, how any physical processes interconnect, that still doesn't give us an explanation of consciousness. You could know all there is to know about the physical processes in the world, and that still wouldn't tell you what it feels like to be me, to be you, to see red, to fall in love, and so on. There just seems to be a fundamental new entity here. So I've suggested we need new fundamental entities in our theories, consciousness, and new fundamental laws to explain it. Is consciousness fundamental? I mean, you can't be sure of anything in this field, but having been through the arguments and the analysis, I guess I'm pretty confident, if God made me bet, consciousness is a fundamental property of the world.
Fundamental meaning
it's a primitive element of the world, like
Right.
space,
Right.
like time, like matter. In physics, we take some things as primitives. We don't try to reduce them to anything simpler. If you take consciousness as fundamental, that's what you try to do. You don't say it's ultimately a bunch of neurons. You say it's one of the primitive elements of the world.
If you can't explain consciousness in terms of the existing fundamentals, space, time, mass, charge, then as a matter of logic, you need to expand the list. The natural thing to do is to postulate consciousness itself as something fundamental, a fundamental building block of nature.
We're used to, the modern scientific picture of us being atoms in the void. Well, I think it can't just be atoms in the void. It's got to at least be atoms in the void plus consciousness. So that's already radical. That tells us something about our existence is a fundamental part of the world.
The failure of materialism leads to a kind of dualism. There are both physical and non-physical features of the world. The arguments do not lead us to a dualism such as that of Descartes, with a separate realm of mental substance. The dualism implied here is instead a kind of property dualism. Conscious experience involves properties of an individual that are not entailed by the physical properties of that individual, although they may depend lawfully on those properties. Consciousness is a feature of the world over and above the physical features of the world.
Is your consciousness, let me try this word, immaterial?
It's not physical. Yeah. There are properties of the world that go beyond atoms in space and time with mass and charge. We need to add a further property to our inventory of the world's properties, consciousness. That doesn't mean it needs to be located in some wholly different realm up in heaven or in the land of ectoplasm and so on. It may be attached to the same stuff right down here. It could be that even fundamental particles have consciousness as among their fundamental properties along with mass and charge. That's not to say they have souls. Physics is very mysterious. There are processes, there are waves, there are fields. But what are these things in themselves? Physics really gives us a mathematical characterization of these things, and that's really useful. But it doesn't tell us what their ultimate intrinsic nature is. So I think this view, the mathematics of physics, could be combined with sort of a metaphysical view, where the ultimate nature of these things is consciousness. These are waves of consciousness, fields of consciousness, which obey these bizarre and interesting dynamics characterized by physics, but which have an intrinsic nature that we're experiencing directly for ourselves when we experience consciousness.
We are parts of the physical world, and the evolutionary process that brought us into existence is part of its history. The aim would be to offer a plausible picture of how we fit into the world. Conscious organisms are not composed of a special kind of stuff, but can be constructed, apparently, from any of the matter in the universe, suitably arranged. Everything, living or not, is constituted from elements having a nature. that is both physical and non-physical. So this account can also be described as panpsychism. All the elements of the physical world are also mental. Matter has some properties or other, to be labeled proto-mental, that account for the emergence of consciousness from brains. Of course that is true. It is just a way of saying that consciousness cannot arise by magic. It must have some basis in matter. Of course matter must have the potential to produce consciousness, since it does it all the time.
As a physicist and a card-carrying neurobiologist, I believe that panpsychism is the intellectually most coherent explanatory framework for the universe I find myself in.
Now, there's nothing in what we know about the universe that would lead me to think we have a good reason for believing in panpsychism, that consciousness is everywhere. And there's a real problem with panpsychism, and that is it doesn't give a coherent account of how consciousness comes to us in the units that it does come to us in. If you're going to say the thermostat is conscious, then what about each screw and each molecule in each screw? So consciousness cannot be described as a kind of jam spread thinly over the whole universe, because we know it comes in discrete units. Maybe with a split brain hypothesis, I have two consciousness, but you don't have an indefinite smear of consciousness. That makes no sense. All right, so that's not a serious option. Quantum mechanics is not deterministic, but here's the puzzle then. If free will is a reality, and the only parts of the universe we know for a fact that lack causally sufficient conditions for the sequence of events that occurs, then there must be some connection between free will and quantum mechanics. How could that be? This is a standard objection, and it's one I used to accept against the quantum mechanical explanation of free will, and that is quantum indeterminacy is randomness, and free decision making is not random. Okay, now formally speaking, that commits a fallacy, that argument of the fallacy of composition, of supposing features of the little things must be features of the big things that the consciousness is made of. But to avoid that, you'd have to say something that doesn't sound very plausible. You'd have to say the quantum indeterminacy, which is random at the submolecular level, gives rise to, through causal processes in producing consciousness, gives rise to a consciousness that inherits the indeterminacy of the quantum level without inheriting the randomness.
Oh, wow.
The most interesting panpsychist philosopher of the 20th century, Alfred North Whitehead. Alfred North Whitehead was one of the first philosophers to realize the implications of quantum theory, partly because he was the only philosopher who really understood mathematics.
Process theology is based on the philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead, whose major work was called Process and Reality, and so the name stuck. But it's a good name because it indicates that the basic entities of the universe are not little bits of matter or numbers, but processes which take a certain amount of time to be, perhaps a billionth of a second only, but nevertheless an event.
Actual entities, also termed actual occasions, are the final real things of which the world is made up. The final facts are all alike, actual entities, and these actual entities are drops of experience, complex and interdependent. This epoch is characterized by electronic and protonic actual entities, and by yet more ultimate actual entities, which can be dimly discerned in the quanta of energy.
According to Whitehead, all things are made of actual occasions, of energetic events. But atoms, molecules, stones, trees, human beings, planets or galaxies, are societies of actual occasions.
The real actual things that endure are all societies. They are not actual occasions.
Well, I call myself a panpsychist, but quite importantly, I don't think that your shirt on the table are having experiences. What I do think is that if there really are fundamental particles, little bits of which everything is made, which is already disputable, then they at least have to be experiential. And one way to look at that is, a lot of people agree that they somehow consist of energy in some way, and I'm saying that energy is itself a kind of experientiality. Insofar as I'm a panpsychist, I think that every patch of experientiality must come with a subject of experience that is having the experience. If you've got radically non-experiential stuff, you can put it together how you like, but you'll never suddenly get feelings. I don't see how that's possible unless there's some kind of feelingness already there at the start.
Pan-experientialism, which literally means all things have experience, might be taken to mean that things such as sticks, stones, and computers are experiencing individuals, analogous to squirrels and human beings. Thus understood, pan-experientialism would have little to commend it, since sticks, stones, and computers show no signs of spontaneity, which we generally use as evidence that experience is present. Whitehead's version of pan-experientialism, however, says that only all genuine individuals have at least some iota of experience. And the criterion for deciding which things are genuine individuals is whether they show signs of spontaneity. Sticks and stones do not. Amoeba, bacteria, macromolecules, and electrons do, arguably. Genuine individuals are of two types. The most elementary units of nature are simple individuals. All higher-level individuals are compound individuals, which are organized so as to support the emergence of a higher-level experience, which in animals we call its mind or soul. Compound individuals are hence categorically different from sticks and stones and computers, which are mere aggregational societies, because no experience higher than those of the billions of molecules emerges. This distinction is so important that Whitehead's doctrine should not be called simply pan-experientialism, but pan-experientialism with organizational duality, the organizational duality between compound individuals and mere aggregational societies.
Whitehead and the compound individual. The theory of the enduring individual, as a society of occasions, interlocked with other such individuals into societies of societies, is the first complete emergence of the compound individual into technical terminology. Compound and composite individuals. Whitehead made a distinction between colonies which do, and colonies which do not, involve a dominating, personal, unit. Plants, and, to a lesser extent, metazoa without brains are of the latter or non-personal class. They are individuals only in a slight degree. We might call them composite, instead of compound, individuals.
The question is whether there is such a thing as mere dead insentient matter. There's no such thing as mere dead matter. The crucial question is not whether everything has a physical aspect, but whether some things have only a physical aspect, like sticks and stones and rocks and so on. And I think that psychicalism brings us face to face with human limitations in a way that materialism doesn't. The basic human limitation just is you don't know what it would be like to be an atom or to be a fish or even to be a chimpanzee. That we never know exactly what it would be like to be that other sort of creature, what it would feel like, and so on. So I think that in psychicalism we're facing our human limitations, and I think the other fellows are running away from it. They want to think they can just about know what an atom is without in purely spatiotemporal causal terms. So that not just human beings make their own decisions, but all the animals do, in fact all the creatures do in some degree. They have a very humble kind of freedom compared to ours. We have more freedom, and God has supreme freedom. I think you have to say that to have creatures at all is to have free creatures. That's what Whitehead means by creativity as the ultimate category. It's precisely what he means.
The idea is not that photons are intelligent or thinking. You know, it's not that a photon is racked with angst because it's thinking, I'm always buzzing around near the speed of light. I never get to slow down and smell the roses. No, not like that. But the thought is maybe photons might have some element of raw subjective feeling, some primitive precursor to consciousness.
But you have constructed a kind of almost a metaphysics, I guess, when you were talking about evidence of kind of mind in the universe. And in your writing, you've talked about 3 levels of mind, I think. There's the human mind. That one you don't have to argue with people much about. They'll buy that. Then you've talked about mind residing at the micro level, the atomic, subatomic level, and then at the very macro level, kind of the universal mind.
Right.
Now, what do you mean by that?
I think it's just an interesting model of how the whole thing might fit together, and I think it's to me it's quite plausible.
Okay, but what is it about the way the subatomic world acts that leads you to think that mind is a reasonable way to describe what's going on there?
Well, simply that it seems to make choices.
And that's part of quantum physics, that notion.
Yes. The fact is that you have an atom of uranium, it sits there on the table, and then tomorrow it's gone. It's decayed into thorium plus an alpha particle. But nobody can predict whether or not that's going to happen today or tomorrow, or it may take 1 billion years. So that the atom seems to have a freedom to choose. That's something which characterizes quantum processes, that they seem to just occur spontaneously. We call that spontaneous decay. And so it's spontaneous. That, to my mind, implies that the thing makes a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So this freedom that the individual atom seems to have seems to me sort of an indication of some rudimentary form of mind.
The first level is the level of elementary physical processes in quantum mechanics. Matter in quantum mechanics is not an inert substance but an active agent, constantly making choices between alternative possibilities according to probabilistic laws. Every quantum experiment forces nature to make choices. It appears that mind, as manifested by the capacity to make choices, is to some extent inherent in every electron. The word decision does not here imply conscious judgment, though in some decisions consciousness will be a factor, but decision constitutes the very meaning of actuality. An actual entity arises from decisions for it, and by its very existence provides decisions for other actual entities which supersede it. Actuality is the decision amid potentiality.
When quantum theory got going in the 1920s, the most interesting panpsychist philosopher of the 20th century, Alfred North Whitehead, realized immediately that if electrons and other quantum particles are waves, which is what quantum theory was saying, then they have time within them. You see, previously people thought that matter was made up of solid little bits, like miniature billiard balls, particles that just persisted in time. But if they're waves, they're processes. And as Whitehead pointed out, a wave takes time to wave. You can't have a wave at an instant. You know, just think of waves on the ocean. When you see them, if you had an infinitesimal slice of a wave, it's not a wave anymore. It's, you have to go through at least one wavelength to know that it's a wave, or what kind of wave it is, and that one wavelength takes time. So it also means that insofar as quantum particles are waves, you can't precisely localize them in space or time. And this is the ultimate reason for the so-called uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics. Whitehead realized, therefore, that even at the most fundamental level, matter is a process, not a thing. And if it's a process in time. And if it's a process in time, then it has a past pole and a future pole. And we are processes in time as well. So I think this is one of the most interesting insights of Whitehead, because he showed that here is a clue to the so-called mind-body problem. Normally, people discuss the relation of mind and body in terms of spatial metaphors. The mind is inside, the body is outside, the external world, the inner life. We're used to this kind of talk. We've all talked in that way, I'm sure. But it's a spatial metaphor for mind. He thought that the best way of understanding it was in terms of time, that the future pole is the mental pole, the past pole is the physical pole, that the relation of mind and body is a relation in time. The mind, the mental pole, is to do with possibilities. Possibilities don't yet exist. Possibilities are not material things. And the Schrödinger equation, which describes what will happen to an electron, it's at the fundamental level of quantum mechanics, is an equation which describes all the possible things that electron could do. As soon as the electron interacts with anything, measuring apparatus or a molecule or anything else, or the screen on an old-style TV set, all those possibilities collapse down to an observable fact. It's sometimes called the collapse of the wave function. And this collapse of the possibilities to an observable fact is what happens when you move from the mental pole. A decision or change comes about so that a decision among these possibilities is made, maybe by chance, maybe by choice, until a decision is made and a fact comes into being, but it's now in the past. When you detect the electron on a screen or an electron detector, it's already in the past. The same applies to us. Our minds are primarily concerned with possibilities. Our consciousness is an arena of possibility. Our dreams, too, are about possibilities, not actualities. And one of the things our minds do, the principal thing, according to this interpretation of Whitehead, is to choose among possibilities. That's what our consciousness is about. And so, for example, every one of us chose to be here today. When we were deciding whether to be here or not, there were many other possible things we could have done this Sunday afternoon. But out of those many possibilities, we chose to be here. And having chosen to be here and having put our decisions into action, we are here. And the fact we're here is an observable physical fact. We can be weighed, measured, photographed, etc., where we are right now. But the process that led to this was through a realm of possibility leading to a decision. And now our minds are concerned with future and other possibilities. I'm talking about new possibilities for science, for example.
It seems to be very probable that our intuition of free will is somehow connected with quantum processes.
And also the phenomenon of consciousness. Do you think that's tied in there with free will? And
yes, obviously.
Yeah.
And of course, then many people believe that that's just an illusion. But it's true that quantum mechanics makes atoms unpredictable. There's a certain kind of freedom that atoms have to jump around, and they seem to choose entirely on their own without any input from the outside. So in a certain sense, atoms have free will. So that's, to my mind at least, it's probably connected with the fact that we have free will. We have at least a strong feeling when we decide to move a hand up and down, that we're free to do it or not. And so it could be that we are actually using the freedom that quantum mechanics allows. So the brain is a kind of an amplifier which takes the freedom of movement of atoms and translates it into freedom of movement of our whole body. That's at least my feeling about it, and we don't understand it in detail, but it looks as though there is a connection.
Of course, panpsychism is only a metaphysical hypothesis how the world works in general, not a scientific theory how consciousness works in detail. So, consciousness remains a mystery.
Consciousness cannot arise by magic. It must have some basis in matter. But we are not told anything about the nature of these properties. Nor are we told how they produce consciousness. In fact, panpsychism is virtually indistinguishable from the Mysterianism I have been defending. I hold that there are unknown properties of matter that explain consciousness. Panpsychism says much the same thing. But metaphysical hypotheses are important for science in at least two ways. First of all, in order to have a general picture of the world we need metaphysical hypotheses. Secondly, in the actual preparation of our research, we are guided by what I have called metaphysical research programs.
The process philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead and his panpsychism are the right metaphysical hypotheses to figure out how consciousness might work.